Are you a parent navigating the complexities of co-parenting, family court, or even domestic violence? If you are looking for ways to help protect your children and build a strong and supportive community around you, then look no further. Gray Minds Think Alike is your go-to resource for everything related to the complexities of family life. Join us as we dive into thoughtful conversations with experts and explore practical tips and strategies for tackling the challenges of parenthood in the throes of adversity so that no parent feels alone and every child's safety is protected. Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to Gray Minds Think Alike. In our virtual studio today, we have Margo Fowkes joining us for a conversation about living with grief. Margo is an author, president of On Target Consulting, and the founder of Saltwater, an online community created to help provide people a safe harbor for those grieving, where people can support one another by sharing wisdom and ideas for healing. This podcast is for anyone who has lost someone they can't live without. A child, a sibling, a spouse, a parent, a friend, and it's for the people who love them. Hi, Margo. Thanks so much for talking with us today. I'm just happy to discuss something, especially during the holidays or milestones, and I'll just get some input. I think I found you originally from just Googling some articles regarding my own grief and loss, and then I came in contact with Saltwater, and I wanted to reach out. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Allie. I've been following your story since you connected with me, and I was so excited to hear that you've launched this podcast and are having these really important conversations.
Thank you. I do it because I want to be able to provide resources for people that contact me needing help. So because I'm not everyone's doctor, lawyer, friend, everything, at least I can interview people that can. So that's the goal here with the podcast. If you just want to start telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you became, I guess, involved in this whole realm of grief and about your consulting agency and how they work together.
Absolutely. So like I think many of us, our family was just thrown into the middle of grief and loss when our son, Jimmy, was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 13 and a half. And I freely confess that I had no real understanding of either how common it was for a child to be diagnosed with a life-threatening illness like cancer, or what the likelihood was of that child not surviving it. It really was that moment of like, who knew that there was this happening in the world? And part of me felt sort of badly about that. And another part of made me realize that, on the one hand, if you haven't experienced it, then it's not something you could know about, right? So Jimmy was diagnosed in 2006, and over the course of the next 8 years, went through a whole series of different treatments. Initially, we had hoped that his cancer would be fully treatable with the first year-long protocol, but then it came back 2 years later, and then again, and then again, and then again, until eventually 8 years later in 2014, he passed away because of the brain cancer.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I found myself on the other end of that once he died, almost feeling like I did when he was first diagnosed, right? I had some connections with parents who'd lost children, but I felt like I was this incredible failure because my child had died. And as a parent, as you know, Allie, we feel like our number one job is to keep our kids safe. And nobody tells us that there are these things that are going to happen to either of us, as they have, where that won't be possible. And so I was casting about looking for websites and groups to connect with, and I couldn't really find what I was looking for. And so I wound up creating it myself. And Saltwater is cast the way it is because the year after Jimmy died, my mother died. And so I had these two very different but very painful griefs that I was carrying. Right. So with Jimmy, of course, no one questions the magnitude of the grief and the pain, right? It's my child, just as when you lost Greyson, right? When my mother died, I got a lot of platitudes, and they were well-meaning platitudes about the long, full life and all of those kinds of things. But they were without important context, which was that I had lost my child and I was in no way prepared to lose my mom. Right. And so instead of creating a website and a community for parents who had lost children, Saltwater from the get-go was broader. And like you, I'm all about involving other people in the conversation who've had different experiences. Because again, with losing Jimmy to brain cancer, I knew one kind of child loss. I didn't understand all the other ways that we can lose kids or anyone in our lives. Right. And so I began with that. And when I launched Saltwater, I also went back to work. And at the time, they felt completely separate to me. There was my work, which I did, and then there was my grief and loss work that it was separate from that. But the bridge between them turned out to be the way that we go back to work carrying our grief. And so people connected to Saltwater and my clients both separately started talking to me about what it was like to go back to work when you were grieving. And particularly when you were grieving a loss that didn't get full acknowledgement or didn't get the same level of understanding that some of them do. And those conversations are what led to more formal interviews and eventually led to the writing of the book that I wrote called Leading Through Loss, How to Navigate Grief at Work. I should know the title of my own book.
Yeah, no, it's very hard to put that hat back on where you have to be professional and you have to use your brain in all ways. I find myself right now, I'm consulting and I freelance, but I find myself, one, I get overwhelmed quickly when I feel like I have to do something because I might not be in the mood, so to speak, or I may just feel like crying at that moment. So that's why I really appreciate the fact that I can freelance and work for myself right now, so I can allow myself that time to sort of have the moments that I need, but also have some work to focus on, because it is actually a big help to know that if I have projects to do, things to do, it gets me out of bed. So I know going back to work like in an office setting is very jarring to me. And I don't know if and when that I will ever be able to be honest. I'm not sure. I can't even picture myself at like the water cooler talking about, oh, how's your weekend? Well, it was shitty. I cried. So I don't know how I'd ever do that again.
Yeah, and I work for myself too. So it was similar in that I thought, I don't know if I can do this after Jimmy died. But at least as I'm trying, I'm not in an office environment where I have to be there for certain set hours, right? Where I can't take a break or it's hard to take a break.
Right. Having that freedom does help.
Makes a big difference. Yeah. And then, as you know, landmines are everywhere, right? You never know when someone's going to say something to you, even just completely unintentionally, that can have you very upset in a moment. Yeah. And if you're in that office, like, it's really hard. Excuse me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get set off at the tiniest little things, even when I'm just walking my dog. So I can't even imagine. So real quick, the book that you wrote talks about how to do such things, how to get back into the workforce after loss, correct?
Yes, it does. And it takes a particular approach to it, which is really, I think of it as a guidebook or a handbook, both for the leader who is trying to support a grieving colleague or employee, or the leader themselves if they're grieving. So it's very much a step-by-step approach to this, because there's a lot of language around we need to be more supportive in the work environment of people who are grieving, which agreed, of course we do. But the problem for someone who's not experienced a profound loss is they don't know what that looks like, right? They don't know how to be supportive other than to say kind things, but they don't know that they need to check in pretty regularly. They don't know that Allie or Margo might very well need the day off that's the anniversary of the day their child died because they haven't been through what we've been through, right? So it really gets down to those very nuts and bolts kinds of things, the questions to ask, the ways to check in, how to involve other people in supporting your grieving employee so that people actually know what to do in those situations.
Well, that's great. I'm sure everyone can benefit from that. And when we say even grieving, it could be any type of loss. I always say that loss is loss. Like you said, it could be a parent, it could be a child, but it could also be, I deal with a lot of parents that haven't seen their children in years, who they're alive, but they still grieve in a way where they can't be with their child or a loved one. So I do know that loss is a broad term, so to speak.
It is. I mean, divorce, illness, a child or a loved one with an addiction or some mental health challenges. There's so many ways we grieve, and we take that into work with us. And oftentimes people don't understand it fully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to have to read it because eventually I may actually end up back in an office. Who knows? But for now, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. Now, I want to discuss a little bit about the saltwater aspect. So it's an online community where people can actually read articles and connect with others that are going through something similar. Where do you get the contributors from?
Really from all over. I mean, sometimes people will just contact me out of the blue and ask if they can share something. A lot of times I'll read something really beautiful online and I'll reach out to the author and ask if they would allow me to share it on Saltwater with obviously appropriate attributions and links and things like that. It really comes from, the pieces come from all over. And I love the variety of it because I've learned over and over again how complicated and complex loss is, and that we can only really be the expert on our own experience. And so what I write might not be that helpful for someone else.
Right.
And so they need a different voice and a different perspective than mine. So I love the breadth and variety of pieces that are on Saltwater. And I try with the resources to offer a really wide range because people are in different stages of grief and they have different experiences and sources of their grief.
Yeah, I had a hard time. I know for me, if I was in a support group or talking to others who are grieving, I just felt, but I know everyone has their own loss and everyone's pain is their pain. So you can't diminish, you can't whatever. But then, like you said, someone will be like, well, I lost my mother. And I'll be like, well, my child was just murdered by his father. And then I would get angry because I just felt like it wasn't comparable. And then I lost my dog and my cat, who I had before I had Greyson. And I always thought, how am I ever going to live without my pets, And then when they died, it was literally the same year Greyson died. And I haven't even given them another thought. Like, it's just crazy how we sort of put a perspective on death and loss. And now, having spoken to so many people that have lost someone, I'm able to compartmentalize loss is loss. And like I said, you can't diminish someone's pain because that's their pain, right? We each have our own pain that we live with. So it was hard for me, but I felt like I couldn't even talk to some of the other parents or people that lost because I just felt so angry. But I'm sure every one of those same people had the same experience.
Yeah, I think there's just so much nuance to it. And the thing that I found, and I'd love to know if you found this as well, but is I was so struck by how much judgment people have about loss, not just the way we grieve. Like that, I sort of knew there'd be this kind of like, it's been a year talk, right?
Well, I'm dealing with all of that now.
Yeah. And that's awful. And I'm not diminishing that but there's also this judgment within loss, right? So when you lose a child or anyone to cancer, unless it's a sort of a lifestyle cancer, as they call it, like a smoker who dies of lung cancer, right? Where there's judgment about that. No one has ever come up to me and said, why didn't you save Jimmy? Why didn't you do more to save your child from dying of brain cancer, right? It's just not something we would say. I'm not a doctor. We did the best we could to try to get the right doctors. But again, it was in the medical profession's hand. What I didn't understand until I started meeting people who'd lost loved ones to suicide or addiction, for example, was the way in which people will go straight to the way that the person died instead of the fact that this person is gone. And it becomes, well, why didn't you do more? Or think different kinds of judgments around that. And it really struck me too when you were talking about losing your dog and cat and feeling like because of all this grief you're carrying, that it was, in a way, it had less of an impact than it might have because of the way that Greyson is so fills you with this sense of sadness. I've also heard the flip side of that, which is I struggled to grieve my person. And then my dog died and I fell apart. And it isn't really the dog. It's that this is everything. Now like everything, right? Yeah. And it's the loss of the dog that was connected to the person. And that's what broke it open. And again, people will be so quick to say, you're grieving your dog. Well, yeah, because it isn't just a dog. You're entitled to grieve it, even if it is just a dog. But they encapsulate so much else when they die.
Well, that's exactly how I felt also, because I have so many baby pictures of Greyson laying in bed with Dax, my dog, and my cat Ruka. And I just felt like it was just the end of everything I ever loved and knew all at once.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. And I still think about all of them. And then what you were saying with about people on milestones, I just had Grayson's 8th birthday was on Friday, on December 6th, and he would have turned 8. And I haven't seen him since he was 4.5. So it's like he doubled his age since the last I saw him. And it was hard to rationalize that. And then every year I've been doing a balloon release at a park that has a tree in his name. And I invite everyone to come. And every year there's less and less people that show until we're just left with just my immediate family. I get that everyone has their life and I can't expect everyone to drop what they're doing at all times. But it always amazes me how there's always like a few strangers that show up or reach out to me or contact me. And then there's people who I've known for years that don't. So it's always hard because I sort of deal with the back and forth of people being a little wishy-washy.
Yeah. And there's that flurry right after, right, where people show up and send messages and make meals. Again, which is lovely, right?
Yeah.
Thank God. Thank goodness for that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it is those special few who keep
showing up.
Yeah. And the ones that really strike me are when my husband or daughter and I will get a text or a note from someone who says, I was just thinking of Jimmy because of this, right? There was something that brought him into mind. And it's a random day. And I think, oh my gosh, he's still on their mind. I love that so much, right? That he continues to be present for them. And again, I imagine, it's not my experience, but I imagine that's harder when the child dies at a very young age because Jimmy was out in the world. So he had these relationships that were his alone as a young adult that Greyson couldn't have. He was 4, right? He wasn't out in the world in that same way, which makes it harder too for you because you have this sort of set of memories and connections and different, I don't know. I'm not saying it very well, but it's
he was deprived his life. And I was deprived being a mother. I mean, I'll always be his mother, but you know what I'm going at here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I don't get those milestones. I don't get those memories. I don't get to see him grow and grow up and to see what he would even look like as a teen or an adult. So, it's so, okay. So saltwater, I was reading a little bit about the meaning of it. And I was reading how it said the sweat, the tears, the sea. Can you just go into a little bit behind that meaning about the healing and what it means?
Sure. So when I was trying to think of what to name the site, I got together with a couple friends of mine and I gave them a really long list of names that I'd brainstormed, most of which were very good. And I had put the term saltwater on the list. And my friend Andy said, why is saltwater on this list? And I said, it's after the Isaac Dennison quote, the cure for anything is saltwater, sweat, tears, or the sea. And she said, that's it. That's what you call it. And she said, you should organize the blog posts in those categories because there's the physical recovery, the sweat involved with grief. There's the tears and the sadness of grief and all the emotions of it. And then the sea is sort of the imagery for the navigating in the aftermath, right? It's not the recovery. It's healing. It's not healed, but it's how we go on in the face of that loss. And so that's how the website is organized. And I also like it because I think even within that division, there are people who are really looking for those different categories, and they don't find everything kind of lumped in together. It's separated based on in that way too.
Yeah, no, I love all that because it's so true. I look to nature in general to sort of find my happy place or whatnot. I know I've been traveling a lot more than I ever have since Greyson's death. And I just know that when you're one with nature, it sort of lets you have that moment to either think or meditate or just, I always just envision Greyson with me when I'm on vacation and enjoying the outdoors. And I do things for him when I'm on vacation, things that I wouldn't have done, like go down a slide or just random things that I wouldn't have done on my own. But I do it now for him. So whether it's the mountains, the sea, I do go to the beach a lot, all of it. So I love that. And I have been on the website and I do like that it's categorized because sometimes I want to read something from another mother that lost their child and specifically their child or a young child, so I can get more comparison rather than it be a different scenario. So I do love that. And I'm going to continue to read it. So we talked a little bit about milestones, and I know the holidays are coming and birthdays and death anniversaries are always really hard. How long now has it been since your son passed?
This was the 10-year anniversary for us this year in February. Yeah, on February 16th. Mm-hmm.
What do you do to honor?
So it kind of varies every year. I usually try to write something about where I am in my journey. Some years, Molly, our surviving daughter, and Dan, my husband, and I have done things together. Some years we sort of grieve on our own. Molly now lives in Houston because she's grown and launched into the world. And so she went to see the Bob Marley documentary on Jimmy's birthday this year because Jimmy loved Bob Marley. So we try to do things that it's like the example you gave about being out in nature and getting on that slide, right? We try to do things that conjure him up for us, that make us feel more deeply connected. But my husband has said that for him, the birthday is the easier day because when he thinks of Jimmy, it's with so much joy.
Right.
So there's some years I think where we skate through the anniversary a little bit more because it is so painful. And then I found this year really unexpectedly, honestly, although in some ways I probably should have seen it coming. Year 10 was brutal for me in a way that it hadn't been really since the first couple of years. And I think what made it harder is I didn't expect it. I thought that the time around the anniversary would be bad and then I would come out of it as I normally did. And this time the kind of feeling of gray, small d depression lasted for months. And I've not had that happen before. So that was a new experience.
I think the number 10 just sounds so jarring. You know, you're like a whole decade just passed. I was thinking that as well when I mentioned, Gray doubled his age. And I feel like it was harder for me to wrap my brain around it this year than it was last year because more time is going by. More time is going by that I haven't seen him. And it hits you. So I do not look forward to that 10-year. And I was saying about doing things for them. This past Friday was his birthday. And I said, well, every year Greyson eats cake and has a pizza party and gets balloons. So every year we've been doing balloon releases and having pizza and eating cake. And for his death anniversary, we've been releasing butterflies. So, and every one of his classmates, his teachers have been so instrumental and show up all the time for every event. They even show me that they'll be at their house at home and a butterfly is there and they'll take a picture. And they're like, just thinking about Gray or little things like that, like you mentioned. So it is special to see those little moments. It's actually crazy. I was just talking to someone about this, how since Gray passed, I see the word gray everywhere. There's like a brand now at Ross called Happily Gray. I actually just bought a pair of pants because it said it. There's a brand at Target called Greyson Threads. I see that just everywhere, whether it's on TV, someone's name, I'm like, wow, that could have been Mr. Black, but it was Mr. Gray. I mean, it's just crazy how his name just pops up everywhere for me now.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, whether you call them signs or just coincidences or whatever term people use, it's like this little crumb of joy or connection or something to our beloveds who are gone.
Yeah, a little reminders that they were here. So
Yeah,
now, what are some tips that you have, I guess, for people that are grieving, especially now during the holidays or for an anniversary? Do you have any set tips that you would offer advice for?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. I think one of the things that's really important is to allow yourself to be where you are. So, for example, when Jimmy died, we tried to stay home one of the first Christmases because we always had. And we discovered that we couldn't do it. And we found ourselves Googling hotels in San Francisco on either the 23rd or 24th and going down to San Francisco for 2 nights to get out of the house because it was just too depressing to be here. And so I found over the years that each year is different. Some years I feel like being home. Some years I don't. Some years I do a little decorating. Some years I don't. And I've stopped judging myself for that. Because I think there's a lot of pressure from other people thinking like, well, it will make you feel better if you come to the family gathering or the Christmas party or decorate or host or whatever it is. And we have to allow ourselves to be where we are. And that also extends to showing up where we want to show up, right? And
yeah,
it may not feel great to go to your friends or your family's big holiday gathering, or you may need to go for a short period of time and then leave. And I think it's about giving yourself permission to just be where you are and to take care of yourself and your own needs.
Yeah, I find that too. I have Greyson stocking up every year that we had, and I have special ornaments made about him on the tree, and I have his very first Christmas ornament that when he was born on the tree. And it's, dealing with holidays, especially when they're so joyful. And I just remember him like opening all his presents and being so excited, and now having a sort of just all tainted. It sort of makes holidays very sad and depressing. And it's almost like, well, why am I even doing this? Why am I even doing this? But even like every year we go to my best friend's house for Thanksgiving. Greyson came multiple times, the 4 years, I guess. And we were just there again this year. And it's like, we see all the other children and I'm just like, how is this my life? How is this it? Of course I'm going to show up because they're so close that they're my second family. But it does it makes you just very sad.
Exactly.
I guess you have to find ways to turn that into joy. I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I think it can be really hard. And I think for the people that are listening to the conversation who might be thinking about how to support somebody else, right?
Yeah.
I think there are lovely ways to do that, right? I've heard stories of people showing up for gatherings like the one you're describing, and there might be a place set for the person who's missing, right? Or a candle burning for the person. Sometimes what's a lovely thing to do too is to take a moment and share some stories about the person who's not there, whether it's a child or an older loved one. It brings them into the room in a way. And particularly for those of us who are grieving a child or a really important person we've loved, you feel like they're with you in a way anyway, but nobody else is acknowledging it.
Right.
And so that's the folks that are hosting or gathered together with you can find a way to bring that person into the room and say their name. And like, imagine saying, remember that Thanksgiving where Greyson had his first turkey or knocked over Susie's wine or whatever the story is. All of a sudden he's there in the room with all of you.
Yeah, no, I do love that. And luckily this past Thanksgiving and the last couple without Grey, that family has been so gracious and they show up to everything and they do remember all the funny times that Grey was over and probably did knock Aunt Susie's drink because there is an Aunt Susie.
Is there really?
Yeah, there is. But they're really good about that. But I do love that advice for others to sort of make a special point or reminder or incorporating them in some way, because a lot of times they're not. And then we shouldn't have to wear T-shirts that say their name on it or have a picture of them on the face to sort of include them into your plans. So that is a good tip. Anything else?
Couple other quick things. One is I think it can be really helpful to stay off social media. Not completely.
I agree.
But I mean, like you go on Instagram during the holidays and it is nothing but shiny whole families, right? And even though that there's all kinds of conflict and yeah, exactly. But it's really, I personally, that's something I do. I discovered it was way too hard to spend a lot of time on social media with that. And the other thing that really helps, I think, too, is that families are going to do what families are going to do. Right. And even though we feel like sometimes like the universe should be kinder to us or we shouldn't be subjected to certain things because we've had this terrible loss, it's not how the world works. And so I think it can be helpful to be in closer touch with your soulmates, essentially, and the people you can call and say, I just went to Thanksgiving at my mom's house and you're not going to believe what happened. And so that you're not calling out of the blue. They kind of know they need to stay in closer contact because the holidays are going to be hard, and they check in a bit more. And you can also feel free to pick up the phone and call and just say, oh my gosh, this was so hard and I need to talk about it.
Right. Well, those are all good. I know I actually have people bring decorations or ornaments for Greyson's tree on his birthday because it's so close to the holidays, and everyone either makes an ornament or buys one or paint a rock that we leave at the tree, around the tree. So for me, I always tell people, I'm like, if you can't make it to his birthday event, just drop off, leave at the tree, leave a rock, leave an ornament, and then I collect them all and I get the rocks and I bring them home, and I just love reading them all, their names, seeing the pictures, what they drew, what they wrote. And then I bring them to the cemetery sometimes, or I keep them in his room and I read them. And I always include a memory box so people can write down the memories they have of Greyson so I don't forget anything.
That's really lovely. I love that, Ellie. Yeah. And do you sometimes find that when they leave you a memory that it's something particularly early on that you might not have known or have forgotten about?
Like his teachers at school would write like really funny things that he did in school. Like he would pee all over the floor or just little things like that. And, I would read this and just like crack up, and just all these little things that I didn't know, their memories when I wasn't with him. And yeah, no, I love it. And I try to keep the memory box out at every event in case there's new people coming. But I mean, there's tons of memories. And if we don't write them down, just my biggest fear is forgetting them. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and particularly because I don't know about you, but my memory is not as good as it was since Jimmy died. There's a part of my brain that sort of never fully recovered from that loss and the impact of it. And so it's that same idea too about why I always encourage people to send a card to someone who's grieving, because they can hold it and they can read it again. And it's like the rocks or the ornaments or the notes that people put in the memory box. We need those kind of tangible physical things to look at and hold, I think.
Yeah, I love doing that. I even actually had a birthday card out for people to sign because I like to remember who came and who knew him and anything that they had to say. I still want to hear it. I still want to see it. You mentioned social media, and I'm on social media now mostly for Greyson's Choice, but I also still go on to post pictures of Greyson on the day of, and back in 2019, 2018. So I don't forget. So other people don't forget. And then that is all I do on Facebook. That is really all, or social media in general, other than for the organization. I don't peruse it like I used to. I don't spend hours looking through people's stuff because it's not true. You think it is, and then it makes you upset. And everyone posts their best, right? No one's going to post their worst pictures with the food on their face and their hair all messed up. But that's real. That's the reality, right? Is when you eat something, you're going to get food on your face. So I just try not to look, and I just go, I post things about the organization, I post clips, and I post pictures of Greyson, and that is it.
Yeah. And I've gotten to be very much the same way, right? I'm mostly on for saltwater or my consulting work because I do have social media for that too.
Right.
And I sometimes go on my Facebook page for different reasons. But yeah, I find that I can't spend a ton of time there for that reason. And I don't think we're alone. You hear that other people express it, even if they're just struggling in general, not even having a profound loss. It's a tough environment to spend a lot of time in.
I definitely agree. You have to sort of use it wisely.
Yeah.
I do also think that there are many online communities like Saltwater or chats or even Facebook groups that people can connect with other people that are going through something similar. So for that, I do like social media because I know that I'm in a few Facebook groups for grieving parents, for I Miss My Son, I think is one, just different ones like that, which are very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fluidity of knowing that you need different things at different points in the journey, and that sometimes it's really comforting to talk to anyone who's had a loss. And then the other times, you've alluded to this too, right? You need to talk to someone who's had your type of loss, whether it's the same relative that's been lost or the same
way,
lost the same way, or the same kind of thing, like other people who are divorced, other people who have a child with mental illness or a loved one with mental illness.
Yeah.
It really does help sometimes.
I've been in contact with a few other mothers who lost their child the same as I lost Gray by the other parent. Mm-hmm. And you would not believe how many of us there are. It would blow your mind that this actually happens. And I'd say 9 out of the 10 times there were red flags and there were people notified to try to stop this from happening. And it still wasn't believed, or nobody did anything about it. Or I know for me, I tried to get restraining orders and I tried to get our time sharing changed, and just nobody believes until something like this happens. And there's a lot of us. There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that really struck me when I was listening to the first episode, right, where your friend is interviewing you about it. And that's such a consistent theme of you saying, this isn't right, this doesn't feel okay, this doesn't feel safe, even the day of those calls to the police saying, please go out to the house, please do a welfare check. And there's such resistance. It's like I can't imagine it as a law enforcement person, and therefore it can't be something that could happen, right? And yet it does far too often. It does.
And until it happens to them, they're not going to change. They're not going to do anything about it. I got Greyson's law passed here in Florida to help facilitate this. So that way a judge can step in or a police officer can step in. Nobody takes the time to even get training on it or learn more on how to stop it from happening. But yeah, that day when I was asking for help and I was literally told we can't send another police officer out there until tomorrow and that it's a liability. We can't break down the door. I'm like, it's a liability? Seriously? I mean, we had to hire a locksmith to break down the door ourselves. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah, we are not good at assessing risk as humans, just generally. And it spreads everywhere, right? In our case, even with Jimmy, I remember having an interaction with the pediatrician who was filling in for his regular pediatrician, who wanted to say, this is just migraines. And I said, but it's not manifesting like migraines, right? It's in the wrong place on his head, for one thing, to be migraines. And he made some flippant comment about, this is why we shouldn't let moms on the internet. And of course, it turned out to be a brain tumor. And so there's just this feeling of like, uncommon things are uncommon, therefore they can't happen. And it's like, no, they're just less common. They're less common. It doesn't mean they can't happen. Right.
Anything can happen at any time. And until it does, people don't believe it. I mean, this is how things are made, how we're aware of them, right? It's about, like I was talking to someone recently about new laws coming in to play. And we were trying to cite different bills or laws or case studies for court. And someone was like, well, I can't find anything to cite. There's nothing like this has happened. And I was like, well, it only takes the first time for it to now be something. And now forever forward, someone is going to look back on this specific case and cite it because it now exists.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's another beauty of,
go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, it's another beauty of the communities that each of us have created, right? Is that it's that sanity check of the things you go through to get to the point you are with regard to your loss, that it's just nice to talk to other people who say, yeah, I went through something similar too. So.
Right. Do you find it helpful to be around people that have also lost a child? Like if you ever people have said, hey, there's this like weekend trip, or I don't even know. Or there was a cruise and it was all grieving parents. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that. Like, it sounded horrible to me. It's so sad. That's so depressing. But I know a lot of people do find solace in that. So I'm just curious if you do.
So I've never done a grief group because I was afraid to go. I was afraid that I couldn't hold the breadth of losses while I was trying to hold my own.
Right.
And I'm sure this is part of the reason I also created Saltwater, right? Was so that I could, like, in the same ways that we build our chosen families, I kind of wanted to build my chosen grief support system. Because it was surprising to me to discover kind of which friends leaned in and the few that I expected to who didn't, and what was comforting and what wasn't. And even with the people who try really hard, sometimes it just doesn't land the way that you need it to. And I do personally, I'm not really good at, I don't put myself in situations that I can't get out of. So like when you said cruise, I'm thinking there's no way to get off that boat if it's not going well for me, right? I'm kind of stuck. It's kind of like a weekend retreat too. I'm not sure I would do that unless I really knew a lot of the folks that were going to be there. But that's just me. I mean,
I was invited to a retreat. I think it was Hayden's Healing or something along those lines. And it was like I don't even know if it was 1 night, 2 nights. And I was like, well, is there a bar? What are we going to be doing? Just like yoga? Like I couldn't even fathom it. Maybe I would now. Maybe as time has passed, I would think about it differently, but not sure.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I had Jimmy, I should say, who was my oldest, going to a little infant care class at the hospital when he was like 2 or 3 weeks old, right? Diaper, they won't sleep, whatever it is, right? And looking around the room and thinking, oh my gosh, all these other moms are parenting newborns too. Like we're all going to be friends. Right. And then you realize that's not how the world works. Just because you're all parents doesn't mean you're going to be friends with everybody.
Right.
And I think that same thing is true with loss. Just because you've had a similar loss, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find the other person comforting or want to have a connection. And it's not a right or wrong. It's just a difference kind of thing. I do find a little bit of that sometimes. It's almost like, well, you should meet my friend so-and-so because she too has lost a child. And it's like, okay, I don't mind meeting your friend, but just because we share this loss does not necessarily mean that she's going to find me comforting or I'm going to find her comforting. We have to see whether or not that's true. It's not a given.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's like in any situation, friends, everything. So, I mean, even just, play dates with Greyson's friends' parents, moms. I would be forced to be in these tight quarters with them during soccer or whatever he was into. And some of them did become my good friends. And some of them I saw in passing. So it's like anything else. But I agree. I have to sort of take it as it is. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and that's it, right? Is to give yourself space and grace to just make the right decision for you and not, as they say, should on yourself, that you should do certain things, be with certain people, to just, this is such a hard world that we live in, this aftermath life. And so I think we have to be kind to ourselves and be okay being kind to ourselves.
Yeah, sure. Now, how does one get your book, Leading Through Loss, How to Navigate Grief at Work? Can we get it on Amazon?
You can get it on Amazon, and that's probably the easiest place to find it, honestly.
Okay. I'm going to post the link in the show notes.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. It's such an interesting topic because everyone does deal with grief in their own way, and there is no right and there's no wrong way, but it's always nice to just sort of talk about it so that way when people do listen and our listeners, they don't feel alone and know that everyone is grieving something. Everyone has lost something, no big, no small. So I appreciate you coming on and hopefully we can connect again.
I would love that, Allie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. I will talk soon. If there's someone that you want to hear from on this podcast, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you would like to be a guest, please reach out at Allie@Greyson'sChoice.org. If you'd like to continue to hear our podcast, please consider donating at Greyson'sChoice.org.